24,000 men, 200,000 enemies, and a cliff behind them. The math said they should all die. If the Muslims lost this one battle, Islam in the Middle East would be finished forever. This is the story of how Khalid bin Walid pulled off the greatest military comeback in history at the Battle of Yarmouk, 636 AD. 10 years before, the Muslims had been a small band hiding in the desert. Now their armies were sweeping north, and the two great powers of the age could no longer ignore them. On one side stood the Roman, the Byzantine Empire. For 1,000 years, Rome had ruled the lands of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt from its capital in Constantinople. Its emperor, Heraclius, had just fought off the Persians, and he meant to crush these Arabs before they grew any stronger. On the other side stood the Muslims, commanded by a man the Prophet himself had named the Sword of Allah, Khalid bin Walid. Heraclius raised the largest army he could muster, some 200,000 men by the accounts of the day. Khalid had barely 24,000, tired and hungry from the march. 8-1, no food, no retreat. And then the Romans made their move. The Romans chose the plain by the river Yarmouk, east of the Sea of Galilee. It looked perfect to them, open ground for their massive cavalry. But Khalid studied it with the eye of a master. On one side, the pass was narrow. On the other, behind the Roman camp, lay the deep gorge of the Yarmouk itself, a sheer drop into the river below. These men did not choose this ground through inexperience, Khalid realized. They chose it so that their own soldiers could not run. The enemy had sealed its own escape. Now, all that remained was to hold them there. The first day, the armies tested each other. Skirmishes rippled across the plain, and both sides drew back as night fell. No one had blinked yet. At dawn, the Romans advanced in force, their cavalry thundering forward. They were the finest horsemen in the world, clad in iron, supported by archers who darkened the sky with arrows. Khalid held his line. He knew the Romans had one fatal weakness: pride. They believed their numbers alone would break the Muslims. For the whole day, the Muslims absorbed the attack. Line by line they gave ground, but never broke. When evening came, the Romans had gained a little earth and lost a great deal of hope. This was not going to be the easy victory they had promised their emperor. On the third day, the Romans changed their tactics. They sent their strongest men, soldiers chained together so they could not flee, straight at the heart of the Muslim line. The pressure was immense. The Muslim right flank began to give way. But Khalid had kept a hidden weapon, a small, fast reserve of mobile cavalry held behind the line, waiting for this exact moment. When the Roman attack hit its limit, Khalid unleashed it, swinging around the enemy flank and smashing into their exposed side. The chained soldiers, who had come to break the Muslims, were themselves trapped and slaughtered in the gorge. The Romans were furious. On the fourth day, they hurled everything at the Muslims and pushed them back, step by step, until the believers were pinned against the very edge of the Yarmouk gorge. One step more, and they would be thrown into the river below. It was the darkest hour of the battle. Many of the Muslim women who would come with the army, carrying water for the wounded, saw their men being driven back. Some of the warriors turned to flee. And then the women of the camp did something no army had ever seen. They picked up the tent poles and stood across the path of the retreating men. "Where are you running?" they cried. "Stand and fight, or your mothers and daughters will fall." Shamed and renewed, the Muslims turned back. The line held at the very lip of the cliff. Now Khalid made the move that would win the battle. He knew the Romans were exhausted, their formations stretched thin by 6 days of fighting. He gathered his fast cavalry and struck, not at the center, but at 3 points of the Roman line at once, in a coordinated blow from 3 sides. The Roman formations, already strained to breaking, could not shift to meet a threat that came from everywhere at once. Their command structure collapsed. Units that could not see the whole field believed they were surrounded, and panic swept through the ranks. And then, in the middle of this chaos, Allah sent a natural ally. A great dust storm, a Hamsin, rose out of the desert and blew straight into the faces of the Romans. Blinded and choking, with the Muslims pressing them from 3 sides, the 200,000-strong army of Rome broke. The retreat became a rout. The Romans ran for the only path that seemed safe, the ravine behind them, not realizing it was the gorge of the Yarmouk. Thousands were driven over the edge and into the river below. The survivors scattered across the desert, hunted down, never to return to the field. The Battle of Yarmouk was over. It was one of the most decisive battles in all of human history. In a single engagement, the Muslims destroyed the grip of the Byzantine Empire on Syria and Palestine. The Emperor Heraclius, watching from his palace, is said to have wept as he bid farewell to the province he could not hold. Within a few years, the Muslims would go on to take Jerusalem, then Egypt, then sweep across North Africa. The city of Constantinople itself, the seat of 1,000 years of Roman power, would one day fall to the armies of Islam. The victory at Yarmouk lit the fuse for the entire conquest of the ancient world. But the Muslims remembered something greater than the land they had won. Khalid bin Walid had stood on the edge of disaster and, with patience, faith, and a strategy no one had seen coming, had turned certain defeat into triumph. He had faced 200,000 men with 24,000, and the impossible had been done. The Battle of Yarmouk teaches us a truth the world has never forgotten. Victory is not counted by numbers. It is counted by courage, by strategy, and by the belief that help comes from a power greater than any army. Where the Romans had pride, the Muslims had faith. Where the Romans relied on their iron, the Muslims relied on Allah. And when the dust cleared, it was faith that was left standing. This is why Yarmouk is remembered after 1,400 years, not because of the land, but because of what it proves, that the smallest of armies, when it holds firm, can move the course of the world. If this story moved you, subscribe to the Golden Caliphate and hit the bell, because every week we bring you a new battle from the history of Islam, Badr, Khandaq, Ain Jalut, and the men who changed the world with their swords and their faith. And tell me in the comments, which battle should we expose next? I read every single comment. The Golden Caliphate, authentic Islamic history, one story at a time.